On Mother's Day morning, sunlight spilled gently across my kitchen window, glinting off the cracked porcelain mug I'd used for years. I was stirring a pot of oatmeal when the familiar sound of tires crunching the gravel outside made me look up. A black Mercedes pulled up, sleek, expensive, almost obscene against my modest driveway. My son stepped out. Ethan Lawton. My only child. The billionaire founder of one of America's biggest tech startups. He walked in with a bouquet of white lilies and that half-smile I'd missed for months, the one that used to light up this kitchen when he was a boy stealing cookies from the jar. "Happy Mother's Day, Mom," he said warmly, though his voice carried the practiced smoothness of boardrooms and investor calls. I hugged him, feeling the expensive fabric of his tailored suit beneath my calloused hands that had once held him through fevers and nightmares, now rough from scrubbing floors and mending old clothes. We sat at the kitchen table where he used to do his homework, its surface still scarred from his childhood scribbles no amount of polish could erase. Ethan leaned back, sipping coffee from my second-best cup, and asked casually, "Mom, did you get the $20,000 Dora brings you every month? I wanted to make sure you're comfortable." My spoon clattered against the bowl. The sound echoed in the sudden silence like a gunshot. 20,000? I whispered. For 6 months, I'd been stretching my small pension like thin dough, mending clothes for neighbors for $15 a bag, even selling my late husband's tools, his precious tools, to keep the electricity from being shut off. I'd been rationing tea bags and eating oatmeal twice a day. And all this time, my son thought I was living in comfort. He frowned, confusion knitting his brow. "Yes. I've been sending it since December. Dora said she hand-delivers it every month." The kitchen fell silent. Outside, a bird sang, the sound almost mocking the storm inside my chest. I forced a small smile, the kind I'd perfected over years of hiding pain. "Oh, dear," I said softly, each word careful as stepping stones across deep water. "I haven't received a single penny." Ethan froze. His coffee cup hovered midair. The smile faded from his face like fog burning off in harsh sunlight. "That can't be right. Dora told me she gives it to you personally. She said you prefer cash." Before I could respond, his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, and something flickered across his face, relief, maybe, or hope for an easy explanation. "It's Dora," he said, answering on speaker. Her voice floated into my kitchen, smooth as honey, practiced as a rehearsed line. "Hi, darling. Just wanted to remind you I'm picking up flowers for your mother this afternoon. She's always so grateful." I watched my son's face as he spoke. "Dora, Mom says she hasn't gotten the money." A pause. Then a light, tinkling laugh, the kind that could disarm anyone who didn't know what to listen for. "Oh, sweetie, she must have forgotten. You know how it is. I bring it every month, cash, just like she prefers. Maybe she misplaced it." Forgotten. The word landed on my heart like a stone. And then she appeared. The front door opened, Ethan must have left it unlocked, and Dora stepped into my modest living room like a magazine cover come to life. Designer heels clicked against my worn linoleum, a silk blouse shimmered under the kitchen light, and her perfume, something French and expensive, filled the air, overwhelming the simple scent of my morning oatmeal. She was radiant. Flawless makeup, gold jewelry that caught the light, a smile that could sell anything to anyone. "Mother," she exclaimed, setting down a shopping bag from Neiman Marcus. "I brought you some lavender sachets. I know how you love them." Her eyes swept over me, my faded house dress, my bare feet, my gray hair pulled back in a simple bun, and I saw it, that flicker of something cold beneath the warmth. Not quite contempt. Not quite pity. Something worse. Dismissal. She didn't see me as a threat. She saw me as an old woman whose word meant nothing against her polished performance. Ethan stood, tension visible in his shoulders. "Dora, Mom says she hasn't received any of the money." Dora's smile never wavered. She walked over, placed a perfectly manicured hand on my shoulder, and said in a voice dripping with gentle concern, "Oh, Mother, You must be confused. I come here every month. Don't you remember? Last time I brought you those nice bath oils. Bath oils. $20 bath oils to account for $120,000. I looked at her calmly. My voice was steady, quiet, carrying the weight of 7 decades. If you brought the money, Dora, it must have gotten lost somewhere between your car and my kitchen table. Because I've never seen a single dollar. The air shifted. Even Ethan felt it. I saw him glance between us, between the gray-haired mother in her worn apron and the glamorous wife in her designer clothes. Dora tilted her head, her smile tightening just slightly. Ethan, darling, your mother's been through so much. Stress affects memory, especially at her age. Maybe we should look into some support services. My memory, I interrupted softly, is sharp enough to remember every bill I've paid, every donation I've received from the church, and every month you didn't walk through that door with an envelope. Silence crashed over the kitchen like a wave. Dora's eyes flickered, just for a moment, with something raw. Calculation. Fear. Then the smile returned, though it no longer reached her eyes. I think there's been a misunderstanding, she said lightly, squeezing Ethan's arm. Why don't we check the accounts together? I'm sure we can clear this up. Ethan nodded slowly, but he was looking at me now with questions forming behind his eyes, questions he'd been too busy, too trusting, too comfortable to ask before. After they left, Dora's heels clicking away like a countdown, I sat alone in my kitchen. The oatmeal had gone cold. The lilies sat on the table, beautiful and indifferent. $20,000 a month. 6 months. $120,000. That money could have fixed my leaking roof. Replaced the refrigerator that hummed louder each day. Bought medicine without choosing between pills and groceries. Let me live out my final years with the dignity I'd spent a lifetime earning. Instead, I'd been counting pennies, accepting charity, whispering prayers of thanks for food bank donations. I pressed my hand to my chest, not from anger, not yet, but from an ache so deep it felt like drowning. A bone-deep betrayal that had been happening in silence while I smiled and pretended everything was fine. That evening, I pulled out my late husband's old blue notebook, the one he'd used for grocery lists and weekend project plans. The pages still smelled faintly of his aftershave. I opened to a clean page and wrote 3 words. Truth costs patience. And beneath it, but silence costs more. I wasn't weak. I'd survived my husband's death, raised a son on a teacher's salary, weathered storms both literal and financial. I'd built a life from nothing and never once asked for more than I'd earned. And I would survive this too. But if Dora thought I'd sit quietly while she played the dutiful daughter-in-law, if she believed an old widow with calloused hands and a cracked coffee mug couldn't fight back, she had chosen the wrong woman to underestimate. If you're still reading this, kindly subscribe, like the video and leave a comment telling me where you are listening from and what time it is at your end. Every voice that joins this story is another witness to what happens when greed meets a mother's quiet fury. And if this has touched something in you, share it, because the truth deserves to travel farther than any lie. To understand how I got here, sitting in this kitchen with a notebook full of evidence and a heart full of steel, you need to know who I was before this. Before the Mercedes in my driveway and the designer perfume in my living room. Before my son became a billionaire and his wife became a thief. My name is Helen Lawton. I'm 69 years old, a retired schoolteacher living alone in a small house in Santa Fe, New Mexico. This house isn't much to look at. The paint peels a little around the window frames. The front porch creaks in 3 different spots. The roof leaks when it rains hard, and I keep a bucket in the hallway closet just for that purpose. But these walls have held a lifetime, mine, my husband Robert's, and our son Ethan's. The living room is crowded with old books, their spines cracked and faded from years of reading and rereading. Steinbeck. Angelou. Bradbury. Poetry collections I used to teach from, their margins filled with my notes in fading ink. Black and white photographs line the mantel, Robert in his work clothes, grinning with dirt on his face. Ethan at 6, missing his 2 front teeth. Our wedding photo, both of us impossibly young and impossibly hopeful. Robert's tools still hang in the garage, organized exactly as he left them 7 years ago. I can't bring myself to move them. Sometimes I walk out there just to smell the oil and sawdust, to remember the sound of him humming while he worked, fixing neighbors' broken fences or teaching Ethan how to measure twice and cut once. Robert Lawton was a good man. Not rich, never rich, but good in the ways that actually matter. He worked as a civil engineer for the city for 38 years, designing water systems and road foundations. Steady work. Honest work. We lived on his salary and my teacher's pay, never quite comfortable but never quite struggling either. We made do. We made it work. And we were happy. We had one son, Ethan. Our miracle. After 3 heartbreaking miscarriages, the doctors told me I might never carry a child to term. But Ethan came anyway, stubborn and strong from the very beginning, arriving 2 weeks early and screaming his lungs out as if to announce, "I'm here, and I'm staying." I raised him in this house, in this kitchen, at this very table. I taught him to read using library books stacked so high they blocked the window light. Robert taught him to work with his hands, to rebuild a carburetor, to frame a door, to understand that honest labor had its own kind of dignity. But Ethan was different from us. Brighter. Hungrier. By the time he was 10, he was taking apart our old radio just to see how it worked, then putting it back together with improvements. By 12, he was tutoring high school kids in math for pocket money. By 16, he'd taught himself programming from library computers and was building websites for local businesses. "That boy's going places," Robert used to say, pride thick in his voice. He was right. Ethan earned a full scholarship to MIT. We drove him there in our old pickup truck, the one with the dented bumper and the tape deck that only played the left speaker. I cried the whole way home. Robert held my hand across the bench seat and said, "We did good, Helen. We raised him right." And we had. Ethan was brilliant, yes, but he was also kind. He called home every Sunday. He sent us cards on holidays. When he made his first $1,000 from a tech contract, he used half of it to replace our water heater without telling us first. "Mom, you were taking cold showers for 3 weeks," he'd said when I protested. What kind of son would I be if I let that keep happening? That was Ethan. The boy who saw problems and fixed them, who used his gifts to help people, who never forgot where he came from. Until, somewhere along the way, he did. Success came fast. By 30, he'd founded his first startup, cloud infrastructure for enterprise clients. By 35, he'd sold it for $23 million. By 38, he'd built a new company, bigger and bolder, with contracts spanning 6 continents and a valuation that made headlines. Ethan Lawton. Tech visionary. Self-made billionaire. Featured in Forbes, Wired, Fortune. My son. The boy who used to help me grade papers at this table was now flying private jets and dining with senators. The calls home became monthly, then occasional, then rare. The cards stopped coming. When he visited, if he visited, it was in tailored suits that cost more than my annual property tax, checking his phone every few minutes, always on his way to somewhere more important. I told myself it was natural. Successful people are busy people. He still loved me. Of course he did. But the truth is, I'd started to lose him long before Dora arrived. He brought her home 5 years ago, on a crisp October afternoon when the aspens were turning gold. "Mom, I want you to meet someone," Ethan had said over the phone, his voice nervous in a way I hadn't heard since he was 16 and asking to borrow the truck. She stepped out of his Tesla, sleek and silver, like something from a science fiction movie, and I understood immediately why he was nervous. Dora was stunning. Tall and willowy, with dark hair that fell in perfect waves, skin that looked airbrushed, and a smile that belonged on magazine covers. She wore a cream-colored cashmere sweater and designer jeans that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. Her heels clicked against my driveway like little hammers. "Mrs. Lawton," she said, extending a hand. Her grip was firm but brief, as if she were afraid of catching something. "Ethan has told me so much about you." Her voice was smooth. Practiced. The kind of voice that had been trained to charm investors and disarm competitors. "Please, call me Helen," I said, ushering them inside. She stepped into my living room, and I watched her eyes sweep across everything: the worn furniture, the mismatched throw pillows, the water stain on the ceiling from last winter's leak. Her smile never wavered, but something flickered behind her eyes. Assessment. Calculation. "What a lovely home," she said. "So, cozy." Cozy. The word people use when they mean small. When they mean poor. Over lunch, chicken casserole, the recipe I'd made 1,000 times, Dora picked at her food and talked about art galleries in New York, charity galas in San Francisco, a yacht party in Monaco where she'd met Ethan. She called me mother with a sweetness that felt rehearsed, like dialogue from a play she'd memorized but didn't quite believe in. And when she looked at me, there was distance in her gaze. Not cruelty, exactly, just absence. As if I were a formality to be endured rather than a person to be known. After they left, Robert sat across from me at this table, his face serious. "That woman doesn't love him," he said quietly. "Robert. I mean it, Helen. She loves what he can give her. Did you see how she looked at this house? At us? Like we were some charming little museum exhibit from his past." I wanted to argue. I wanted to believe my son, my brilliant, successful son, could see through superficiality. But Robert had always been a good judge of character. And deep down, I'd felt it too. That coldness beneath the warmth. That sense that Dora's affection was a performance, and we were just background actors. They married 6 months later in a ceremony that cost more than Robert and I had earned in a decade. Dora wore a custom gown. The venue was a vineyard in Napa Valley. The guest list included tech moguls, venture capitalists, and at least one sitting congressman. Robert and I sat in the back row, dressed in our Sunday best, feeling like strangers at our own son's wedding. That was 3 years ago. Robert died 2 years after that, a heart attack, sudden and merciless, while he was trimming the roses out front. I've been alone ever since. There was one day, though, one perfect day, when we were all together and genuinely happy. It was before Dora, before the billions, before the distance grew too wide to cross. Ethan had just sold his first startup. He was 35, flush with success but still grounded enough to remember home. He drove up in a new car, modest by his current standards, and spent the entire weekend with us. We hiked the trails behind the house. We cooked together in this kitchen, Robert manning the grill, Ethan chopping vegetables, me making my famous peach cobbler. That night, we sat on the back porch watching the sunset paint the desert hills in shades of amber and rose. Ethan leaned his head on my shoulder, just like he used to as a child. "I couldn't have done any of this without you too," he said quietly. "Everything I am, everything I've built, it all started here." Robert squeezed his hand. "We're proud of you, son. Not because you're successful. Because you're good." That was the last time the three of us were together. Robert died 11 months later. And Ethan? He kept building his empire. Kept climbing. Kept moving further and further away until the boy I raised became a stranger in expensive suits who thought sending money was the same as being present. That evening, after the oatmeal had gone cold and the lilies had started to wilt in their vase, I sat alone at the kitchen table with Robert's old blue notebook in front of me, the one he'd used for grocery lists and weekend project sketches. I opened to a clean page, my hand steady despite the storm inside my chest. And I wrote one line in careful script. "I need to know the truth before it's too late." I stared at those words for a long time, feeling their weight settle around me like armor. Somewhere in this city, my son's wife was living in luxury built on lies. Somewhere, $120,000 that should have kept me warm and fed had vanished into designer handbags and spa treatments. But I wasn't helpless. I wasn't just some old widow to be pitted or dismissed. I was Helen Lawton. I'd survived loss, raised a genius, taught hundreds of children, and weathered every storm life had thrown at me. And I would survive this too. The truth was coming. I could feel it like a change in the weather. And when it arrived, no amount of expensive perfume would cover the stench of what Dora had done. The days after Mother's Day moved slowly, like honey dripping from a spoon. Ethan called twice that first week, brief, apologetic calls where he promised to look into the accounting and straighten everything out. His voice carried the distracted tone of a man juggling a dozen crises at once, each one more urgent than his mother's quiet struggle. "I'm sure it's just a clerical error, Mom," he said during the second call. "Dora handles a lot of the family finances. She's very organized. There's probably just some confusion about which account." "Of course, dear," I'd interrupted gently, not wanting to push. "Not yet. Take your time." But time was exactly what I didn't take. While Ethan promised to investigate, I began my own quiet inquiry. I pulled out Robert's blue notebook and started a new section on a fresh page. At the top, I wrote, "Documentation." Beneath it, I drew 3 columns, date, event, and observations. I would become a detective in my own life. Patient. Methodical. Precise. Dora came by the following Thursday, arriving at 2 in the afternoon in a car I'd never seen before, a white Range Rover with leather seats so pristine they looked like they'd never been sat in. The price tag for something like that? Easily $70,000. Maybe more. She stepped out wearing ivory linen pants, a silk blouse the color of champagne, and shoes I recognized from a magazine ad, Manolo Blahnik, over $800 a pair. Gold bracelets jangled on her wrist as she reached into the passenger seat and pulled out a gift bag. "Mother," she called, waving as she walked up the cracked driveway. "I brought you something." I opened the door, my smile fixed in place like a mask I'd learned to wear over years of dealing with difficult parents at teacher conferences. "Dora. What a surprise." "I was in the neighborhood," she said breezily, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. Her perfume, something floral and undoubtedly expensive, filled my small entryway. "I wanted to check on you. Ethan mentioned you seemed upset on Mother's Day." Upset. As if my concern over $120,000 in missing money was merely emotional turbulence. She handed me the gift bag. Inside was a lavender-scented candle and a box of gourmet chocolates, the kind sold in boutique shops for $40. "Thank you," I said, setting them on the kitchen table. "That's very thoughtful." Dora settled into a chair, crossing her legs with practiced elegance. "How have you been feeling? Ethan worries about you, you know. He wants to make sure you're comfortable." I poured her a glass of water, tap water in my second-best glass, the one without chips, and sat across from her. "I'm managing," I said carefully. "Though I'm still confused about the money Ethan mentioned. The $20,000 monthly payments?" Her smile didn't waver. "Oh, that. I spoke with our accountant. There was a small delay in processing last month, but everything's been sorted. You should see it deposited soon." "I see," I said, watching her face. "And the previous months?" "All accounted for." She waved a hand dismissively. "Sometimes these corporate accounts take time to process, especially with international holdings. Ethan's finances are complex." She said it like I wouldn't understand. Like a retired schoolteacher couldn't possibly grasp the intricacies of wealth management. I nodded slowly. "Of course. I'm sure you're right." We chatted for another 20 minutes, surface-level conversation about the weather, her latest charity event, a restaurant she'd discovered in Albuquerque. The entire time, I watched. I noted. I memorized. After she left, I returned to my notebook and wrote. May 25th, Dora visit. New Range Rover, white, pristine. Designer clothes. Manolo Blahnik shoes, $800. Claimed accountant resolved, processing delay. No envelope. No proof. No apology. Observation, she's spending money like water while telling me to wait for mine. The visits continued. Always unannounced. Always with small gifts, scented soaps, herbal teas, decorative hand towels. Never cash. Never envelopes. Never the $20,000 Ethan believed she was delivering. June 8th, new diamond earrings. Mentioned casually they were an anniversary gift from Ethan. June 19th, designer sunglasses perched on her head. Chanel logo visible. July 2nd, spoke about remodeling their guest bathroom. Budget, $45,000. Just for fun, she said. I recorded everything. Dates. Times. What she wore. What she said. The subtle ways she redirected conversation whenever I mentioned the money. The practiced sympathy in her voice when she asked about my finances, as if my poverty were a medical condition to be managed with kind words and cheap candles. Meanwhile, my own bills piled up. The electric company sent a second notice. I skipped my blood pressure medication to save $30. I ate oatmeal for dinner 3 nights in a row and told myself it was healthy, economical, sensible, anything but what it actually was, survival. At night, I lay awake doing math in my head. 6 months. $20,000 per month. $120,000 total. Enough to replace my roof. Buy a reliable car. Live comfortably without choosing between medicine and groceries. All of it gone. Vanished into Dora's closet, onto Dora's wrists, into Dora's driveway. On a Tuesday morning in mid-July, I dressed in my best blouse, 15 years old but still presentable, and walked to First National Bank on Canyon Road. The interior was cool and quiet, smelling faintly of paper and air conditioning. I approached the counter where a young teller named Melissa was working. I'd seen her before, always kind, always patient with the elderly customers who took too long counting change. Good morning, Mrs. Lawton, she said warmly. How can I help you today? I slid my bankbook across the counter, my hands trembling slightly. I need to check on some deposits. My son said he's been sending monthly transfers of $20,000, but I haven't seen them in my account. Could you verify if they've been coming through? Melissa's smile faltered. She typed into her computer, her brow furrowing as she scanned the screen. Let me check. What's the sender's name? Ethan Lawton. Or possibly from one of his company accounts. More typing. A longer pause. Then Melissa looked up, her expression gentle but apologetic. Mrs. Lawton, I'm not seeing any deposits from an Ethan Lawton or any business entities associated with that name. The last significant deposit to your account was your pension payment on July 1st. The words hit like stones. Nothing? I whispered. Nothing at all? I'm sorry. Let me double-check with a supervisor. She disappeared into a back office. I stood at the counter, aware of other customers behind me, aware of my worn purse and second-hand shoes, aware of how small I must look to the world, just another old woman confused about her finances. Melissa returned with an older man, the branch manager, who confirmed what she'd said. No transfers. No deposits. Nothing from Ethan Lawton or any associated accounts in over 18 months. Is there anything else we can help you with? The manager asked. I started to say no, then stopped. Could the money have been transferred to a different account? Maybe one I don't know about? The manager's expression shifted, subtle, but I caught it. Concern. Maybe even suspicion. That would be unusual, he said carefully. But it's possible if someone opened an account using your information. If you suspect fraud, we can help you. No, I interrupted quickly. No, I'm sure it's just a misunderstanding. Thank you for your time. I left before they could ask more questions, before the word fraud could solidify into something real and terrifying. Outside, the July sun was merciless. I walked home slowly, my legs weak, my chest tight. Maybe the transfer went to another account. The words echoed in my mind all afternoon, all evening, even as I prepared a simple dinner of canned soup and crackers. Another account. In my name but not mine. Money flowing somewhere I couldn't see, into hands that had no right to hold it. That night, I sat at the kitchen table with Robert's photograph in my hands, the one from our 25th anniversary, both of us gray but happy, his arm around my shoulders. I traced his face with my thumb, feeling the smooth glass beneath my fingertip. Robert, I whispered to the empty room, what would you do if our son's wife was stealing from me? The photograph offered no answer. Only his frozen smile, forever kind, forever gone. I set the frame down gently and opened my notebook to a fresh page. My hand was steady as I wrote 3 words. Truth costs patience. But beneath them, in smaller letters, I added. But silence costs more. I closed the notebook and turned off the kitchen light. Tomorrow, I would keep watching. Keep recording. Keep waiting for the moment when patience transformed into action. Because the truth was coming. And when it arrived, Dora's perfect smile wouldn't save her. The call came on a Thursday afternoon in late July, when the heat pressed down on Santa Fe like a weight and even the lizards sought shade beneath the porch steps. Mrs. Lawton? This is Martin Chen. I don't know if you remember me, but I was in your 5th grade class back in. Martin. I interrupted, a genuine smile breaking across my face for the first time in weeks. Of course I remember you. The boy who built a working volcano for the science fair and nearly set off the fire alarm. His laugh came warm through the phone. That's me. Still causing minor disasters, just in spreadsheets now instead of baking soda. Listen, I'm in town visiting my parents, and I saw your name come across my desk at work. I thought, well, it's been years. Would you have time for coffee? I'd love to catch up. Something in his voice, a hesitation, a carefulness, made my pulse quicken. I'd like that very much, I said. We met the next morning at the O'Hory's Coffee on Cerrillos Road, a small cafe I used to frequent with Robert on Saturday mornings. Martin was waiting at a corner table, and I recognized him immediately despite the years. The same earnest eyes, the same quick smile, now dressed in business casual instead of grass-stained jeans. He stood when I approached, pulling out my chair like I'd taught his entire class to do during our unit on manners and respect. Mrs. Lawton, you look exactly the same, he said, though we both knew it was a kind lie. I'd aged. The mirror didn't let me forget it. And you've grown into a fine young man, I replied, settling into my seat. Your mother must be very proud. We ordered coffee, his with cream and sugar, mine black, and spent the first 20 minutes catching up. He told me about his degree in finance, his job at Lawton Technologies, yes, your son's company, small world, his recent engagement to a woman named Sophie who worked in nonprofit management. I told him about Robert's passing, about the quiet rhythm of my days, about the garden I still tended despite my creaking knees. I didn't mention the missing money. Didn't mention Dora. Kept my voice light and my smile steady. But Martin, like many of my former students, had learned to read between my lines. Mrs. Lawton, he said carefully, setting down his cup. I hope this isn't overstepping, but, when I saw your name at work, I wanted to make sure everything was okay. My hands tightened around my own cup. My name? He hesitated, glancing around as if the walls might have ears. When he spoke again, his voice was lower. I work in the finance division. Part of my job is processing internal transfers and trust disbursements. About 3 months ago, I was reviewing the monthly allocation reports, and I saw a recurring transfer to something called Helen Lawton Trust B. It's substantial, $20,000 a month. Mrs. Dora handles the authorization personally. The cafe seemed to tilt. The ambient noise, the hiss of the espresso machine, the murmur of other conversations, faded into a distant hum. Trust B, I repeated, my voice barely above a whisper. Martin nodded, his expression troubled. I assumed it was your account. A family trust Mr. Lawton set up for you. But then I thought, if it were yours, wouldn't you have mentioned it? And the way Mrs. Dora keeps those files locked in her personal office, separate from the regular accounting. He trailed off, studying my face. You don't know anything about it, do you? I couldn't speak. Couldn't breathe. The words stuck in my throat like broken glass. Martin reached across the table, his hand hovering near mine but not quite touching, respecting boundaries even in concern. Mrs. Lawton, are you getting the money your son is sending you? The question hung in the air between us, sharp and unavoidable. I shook my head slowly. Once. Twice. The motion felt like lifting stones. No, I whispered. I haven't received a penny. The color drained from Martin's face. Oh God. Mrs. Lawton, I think you need to talk to Mr. Ethan. If there's an account in your name that you don't know about, and Mrs. Dora is the only one authorizing transfers to it. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. My name. My identity. Being used to funnel money into an account I'd never opened, never seen, never touched. While I counted pennies and skipped meals, someone, Dora, was depositing $20,000 monthly into a ghost account bearing my name. Martin, I said quietly, forcing my voice to remain steady, can you get me proof? Documentation? Anything that shows this account exists? He bit his lip, clearly torn. Mrs. Lawton, I could lose my job. Those are confidential. I understand. I would never ask you to risk your career. I reached across the table and squeezed his hand briefly. You've already done more than enough by telling me. Sometimes just knowing where to look is enough. He nodded slowly, relief and guilt warring on his face. If you need anything, if you need someone to testify or verify what I saw, I will. You were one of the best teachers I ever had. You taught us that honesty matters, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. My eyes burned with tears I refused to shed in public. Thank you, Martin. For remembering. For caring enough to tell me. We parted outside the cafe, him heading to his parents' house, me walking slowly back to my car, Robert's old Camry, 19 years old and running on prayers and stubbornness. I sat in the driver's seat for a long time, hands gripping the steering wheel, staring at nothing. Helen Lawton Trust B. Not my account. Not my signature. But my name. My identity. Stolen and repurposed, twisted into a tool for theft. The betrayal felt physical, a hollow ache in my chest, a trembling in my hands that wouldn't stop. Dora hadn't just lied. She'd done something far more calculated, far more cruel. She'd created a phantom version of me, a paper ghost that received the money while the real Helen Lawton ate canned soup and wore shoes with cardboard inserts to cover the holes. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat at the kitchen table with the lamp burning low, surrounded by papers I hadn't looked at in years. My old accounting ledger from my days as the church treasurer, a thick binder with tabs and columns, every entry recorded in my careful handwriting. I opened it to a blank section and began creating a new ledger. At the top, I wrote, what was stolen. Month by month, I documented it. December, $20,000. January, $20,000. February, $20,000. March, $20,000. April, $20,000. May, $20,000. June, $20,000. 7 months. $140,000 total now. Beside it, I created a second column, what I spent instead. Church food donations. Canned soup. Borrowed money from my neighbor for the water bill. Sold Robert's tools. Skipped medications. Wore the same 3 outfits on rotation. The contrast was obscene. On one side, a number so large it felt abstract. On the other, the grinding, humiliating reality of poverty, not the dignified kind that comes from simple living, but the desperate kind that comes from being robbed blind while everyone tells you to be grateful for scraps. I pressed my palms flat against the table, feeling the old wood grain beneath my skin, the same table where Ethan had done his homework, where Robert had read the Sunday paper, where 3 generations of love and loss had left invisible marks. I will find proof, I whispered to the empty room. And when I do, she'll answer for every lie. The next morning, I drove to the local nursery and bought a small seedling, a juniper, native to New Mexico, hardy and stubborn. The kind of plant that could survive drought, wind, and neglect, and still push green life toward the sun. I planted it outside my kitchen window, in the spot where I could see it every morning while making coffee. I dug the hole myself, my arthritic hands protesting, and settled the roots carefully into the earth. As I patted the soil down around the base, I spoke quietly, as if making a vow to something larger than myself. For every lie buried, truth will grow. I watered it slowly, watching the water sink into the thirsty ground. Inside, my notebook waited. My evidence grew. My resolve hardened like sun-baked clay. Dora thought she'd been clever. Creating a fake account. Using my name. Keeping it hidden in locked files and private authorizations. But she'd made one critical mistake. She'd underestimated a schoolteacher's ability to grade papers, balance books, and spot a forgery from across the room. I stood up, brushing dirt from my knees, and looked at the small green seedling. It would grow. Slowly, patiently, inevitably. Just like the truth. August arrived with monsoon clouds that promised rain but delivered only distant thunder and empty threats. The air hung heavy with anticipation, as if the sky itself was holding its breath. I became a woman of rituals and routines, each one designed to build my case brick by invisible brick. Every morning, I woke at 6 and sat at the kitchen table with my blue notebook and a cup of black coffee. I reviewed my entries like a general studying battle maps, dates, conversations, observations. I added new details as they came to me, the exact shade of Dora's lipstick during her July 12th visit, coral, the way she'd checked her phone 17 times during our 20-minute conversation, the Louis Vuitton purse she'd set on my worn couch as if afraid it might catch poverty like a disease. I kept my old flip phone charged and nearby. When Dora called, always with excuses about delayed transfers or complicated accounting, I recorded every word. The phone had a simple voice memo feature that Robert had shown me years ago. Just in case you need to remember something important, he'd said. He'd been more prophetic than he knew. Mother, I'm so sorry I haven't been by, Dora's voice purred through the speaker on August 3rd, things have been absolutely chaotic with Ethan's new acquisition. But I made sure your transfer went through last week. You should see it any day now. I pressed record and replied calmly, that's wonderful, dear. And you'll bring the paperwork when you visit next? I'd love to see the bank records, just to keep my own files organized. A pause. Brief but telling. Of course. I'll bring everything. You know how thorough I am with these things. She never brought anything. But I had her promise on tape. Martin became my unlikely ally, though we both understood the risk he was taking. We met twice more over the following weeks, always in different locations, a bookstore cafe in Albuquerque, a park bench near the plaza, once in the public library where we could speak in whispers between the stacks. He brought printouts hidden in manila folders, photocopies of transfer authorizations with Dora's signature, account statements showing deposits to Helen Lawton Trust B that I'd never seen a penny of. This is the authorization from June, he said during our third meeting, sliding a paper across the library table. See? Her signature, her employee ID, her approval code. And look here, the account number doesn't match any of the family trust accounts Mr. Lawton has on file in the main system. It's completely separate. I studied the document, my reading glasses perched on my nose, seeing the proof in black and white. Account number ending in 7392. Beneficiary, Helen Lawton Trust B. A monthly disbursement, $20,000. How is this possible? I whispered. How could she open an account in my name? Martin's jaw tightened. She probably forged your signature on the opening documents. Banks don't always verify thoroughly when it's a family trust situation, especially if it comes through a corporate wealth management channel. They assume the paperwork is legitimate. Can you get me the original account opening documents? He shook his head. Those would be in Mrs. Dora's personal safe. I've tried, Mrs. Lawton, but I don't have access. What I've given you is already pushing the boundaries of what I can legally. I placed my hand over his, the way I used to comfort anxious students before big tests. You've done more than enough, Martin. More than I had any right to ask. What you've given me is sufficient. The rest I'll handle myself. He looked at me with something like awe. You were always the toughest teacher I had. I used to think you were strict. Now I realize you were just preparing us for the real world. The real world, I said quietly, requires receipts. The loneliness of those weeks was profound. Every evening, I sat alone at my kitchen table, surrounded by evidence of betrayal, and felt the weight of Robert's absence like a physical ache. He would have known what to do. He would have stormed into Ethan's office, laid out the facts, demanded justice with the quiet fury of a righteous man. But Robert was gone, and I was here, and the silence of the house pressed against me like water. Some nights I talked to his photograph. I'm doing the right thing, aren't I? I'd whisper, touching the glass frame. I'm not being vindictive. I'm not being cruel. I'm just trying to survive with my dignity intact. The photograph never answered, but somehow asking the question helped. Other nights, I prayed, not the rote prayers from church services, but raw, desperate conversations with whatever God listened to old women sitting in dark kitchens. Please don't let this destroy my son. Please let him see the truth without hating me for bringing it to light. Please let justice and love somehow coexist in the same space. But I knew the truth. Justice and love rarely occupied the same room without someone getting hurt. Meanwhile, without my knowledge, something was shifting in Ethan's world. I learned about it later, but even then, I could sense it in his voice during our brief phone calls. A new edge. A wariness. Mom, I'm still looking into the financial situation, he said during a Sunday call in mid-August. His voice sounded strained, exhausted. There are some discrepancies I'm trying to understand. Take your time, dear, I said, keeping my tone light. I know you're busy. Dora says the money's been sent. She showed me what looked like transfer confirmations. But I checked with my accountant, and he's saying something different. I don't, he stopped abruptly. I don't understand what's happening. My heart clenched. I could hear it beginning, the first cracks in his trust, the first whispers of doubt. Part of me wanted to tell him everything right then, to spare him the slow agony of discovery. But another part, the part that had been methodically building a case, knew that premature revelation would give Dora time to cover her tracks, to spin new lies, to turn my word against hers in the court of my son's heart. I'm sure you'll figure it out, I said gently. You always do. After we hung up, I added a new entry to my notebook. August 18th, Ethan suspects something. Mentioned discrepancies. He's starting to see. But not yet. Not fully. Soon. By late August, I had everything I needed. Recordings of Dora's lies. Martin's photocopied documents. My own meticulous ledger showing the contrast between what I should have received and what I'd actually survived on. Photographs I'd discreetly taken during Dora's visits, her luxury car, her designer clothes, time-stamped and dated. I organized it all into a manila folder, each piece of evidence labeled and cross-referenced. Then I placed the folder inside a cream-colored envelope, the nice kind I saved for special occasions, and sealed it with a red wax seal I'd bought specifically for this purpose. On the outside, in my careful script, I wrote, "Thank you." It felt appropriate. Ironic. A woman who'd stolen from me would receive gratitude for teaching me exactly how strong I could be. On the last Saturday of August, I called Ethan. "Sweetheart, I'd like to have you and Dora over for dinner. Tomorrow evening, if you're free. Nothing fancy, just some home cooking and family time." He sounded surprised but pleased. "Tomorrow?" "Yeah, Mom, I think we can do that." "Is everything okay?" "Everything's fine," I said, my voice steady as stone. I'd like us all to be together. It's been too long." 6 o'clock. Perfect. After I hung up, I walked to my kitchen window and looked out at the juniper seedling. It had grown, not much, but enough. New green shoots reached toward the sun, stubborn and alive. I touched the window pane, feeling the warmth of the day's heat still trapped in the glass. That night, I prepared everything. I cleaned the house until it shone. I set the table with Robert's good silverware, the set we'd received as a wedding gift 40 years ago and used maybe a dozen times. I placed the sealed envelope in the center, where a flower arrangement might normally sit. Before bed, I knelt beside my mattress, something I hadn't done since I was a child, and pressed my palms together. "Give me strength," I whispered. "Give me clarity. And please, please let my son forgive me for what I'm about to do." I climbed into bed and lay in the darkness, my heart surprisingly calm. Tomorrow, the performance would end. Tomorrow, the light would arrive, harsh and unforgiving. Tomorrow, Dora's perfect facade would crack, and the truth would spill out like water from a broken dam. I closed my eyes and whispered into the night. Tomorrow, I will dine with the devil, and bring light to the table. And somewhere between prayer and promise, I finally slept. The house had never looked more beautiful. I'd spent the entire day preparing, moving through each task with the focused calm of someone who knows exactly what's coming and has made peace with it. The windows gleamed. The floors shone. I'd even dusted the baseboards, something I hadn't done in months, because tonight, everything needed to be perfect. The dining table, rarely used, usually buried under mail and grocery circulars, was transformed. Robert's wedding silverware caught the late afternoon light. White linen napkins I'd ironed by hand sat folded beside each plate. 3 tall candles flickered in the center, their flames steady and unwavering. And beside them, the cream-colored envelope with its red wax seal. "Thank you," written across the front in my careful script. In the kitchen, rosemary chicken roasted in the oven, filling the house with the smell of garlic and herbs. I'd made Robert's favorite recipe, the one I used to cook for special occasions, for celebrations, for moments that mattered. Roasted potatoes with olive oil and thyme. Fresh green beans. A apple pie cooling on the counter, its crust golden and perfect. Everything was ready. Everything was in place. At 5:45, I changed into my best dress, navy blue with small white flowers, the one I wore to church on Easter. I brushed my gray hair and pinned it back simply. No makeup except a touch of lipstick. I wanted to look like myself. Not diminished. Not desperate. Just present. I stood in front of the bathroom mirror and met my own eyes. "You can do this," I whispered. My reflection stared back, steady and sure. They arrived precisely at 6 o'clock, Ethan's Tesla pulling into the driveway with its characteristic electric hum. I watched from the window as they stepped out. Ethan in casual expensive clothes, designer jeans, a crisp white shirt. Dora in a cream-colored dress that probably cost more than my monthly pension, her hair styled in perfect waves, her smile already fixed in place. They looked like they'd stepped out of a magazine. Beautiful. Successful. Untouchable. I opened the door before they could knock. "Mom," Ethan said, pulling me into a hug. He smelled of cologne and stress, his shoulders tense beneath the expensive fabric. "The house looks amazing. And whatever you're cooking smells incredible." "Just some simple home cooking," I said, kissing his cheek. Then I turned to Dora. "Hello, dear." She leaned in for an air kiss, her perfume washing over me. "Mother, you've outdone yourself. This is lovely." Her eyes swept the room, taking in the candles, the silverware, the carefully set table, and something flickered across her face. Confusion, maybe. Or the first whisper of unease. "Come, sit," I said, gesturing to the dining room. "Dinner's almost ready." We settled around the table, Ethan and Dora on one side, me on the other. The candles cast dancing shadows across their faces. Through the window, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. I served the chicken, the potatoes, the green beans. Poured water into crystal glasses, another wedding gift, rarely used. Made small talk about Ethan's work, about the weather, about nothing in particular. Dora laughed at appropriate moments, her performance flawless. Ethan seemed tense but tried to hide it, asking about my garden, about the church ladies, about whether I needed anything fixed around the house. I'm managing just fine, I said, cutting my chicken with deliberate precision. Thanks to your generosity, of course. Ethan set down his fork. Mom, about that. I've been meaning to talk to you about the money situation. Oh, no need, I interrupted gently, smiling at Dora. I wanted to thank Dora properly, actually. In front of you. For being so faithful about delivering the money every single month. Not everyone would be so reliable. Dora's smile brightened, though I saw her fingers tighten slightly around her fork. Of course, Mother. It's the least I can do. Family takes care of family. Absolutely, I agreed, my voice warm as honey. Every month, like clockwork. $20,000. That's, what? 7 months now? 8? 8, Dora confirmed without hesitation. Since January. I nodded slowly, letting the moment stretch. Ethan looked between us, his brow furrowed. That's what I thought too, I said conversationally. Though it's strange. What's strange? Ethan asked. I met his eyes across the candlelight. The bank says they haven't received any transfers from you since last December. Not a single deposit to my account. The air shifted. The temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Dora's smile froze. That must be a banking error. You know how these things. And when I asked if perhaps the money went to another account, I continued, my voice still calm, still gentle, they suggested checking for accounts opened in my name that I might not know about. Accounts like. I paused, letting the words settle. Helen Lawton Trust B. Ethan went still. What? Dora's face paled beneath her perfect makeup. I don't, that's. Strange name for an account, don't you think? I reached for the cream envelope, my movements deliberate and slow. An account I never opened. Never signed for. Never knew existed. I slid the envelope across the table toward Ethan. It moved through the candlelight like a judge's gavel. But apparently, someone's been depositing $20,000 into it every month. Someone with authorization access. Someone who told my son she was hand-delivering cash to me. Ethan's hand trembled as he reached for the envelope. He broke the wax seal and pulled out the contents, pages of photocopied documents, bank statements, Martin's carefully typed summary letter, my own ledger comparing what I should have received with what I'd actually survived on. The silence was absolute. Even the candle flames seemed to still. I watched my son's face as he read. Watched confusion shift to disbelief, disbelief to horror, horror to something that looked like grief. Ethan, Dora started, her voice high and thin. Is this real? He whispered, looking up at me. His eyes were red-rimmed, desperate. Mom, is this real? Every page, I said quietly. Every document. Every recording. I've been documenting since Mother's Day. Since the moment you asked if I'd received the money. He turned to Dora, and I saw something break in his expression. You told me you were bringing it to her. Every month. You showed me transfer confirmations. It's not what it looks like, Dora said quickly, her composure cracking. There were complications, administrative issues. Don't. Ethan's voice cut through her words like a blade. Don't lie to me. Not now. Not about this. He held up one of the documents, the authorization form with her signature, her employee ID. This is your signature. Your approval code. You opened an account in my mother's name and deposited money meant for her into it. Money I thought was keeping her comfortable while she's been, his voice broke. While she's been selling Dad's tools to pay her electric bill. Dora's eyes filled with tears, the practiced kind that had probably won her sympathy 1,000 times before. "Ethan, please, I can explain." "Then explain." He slammed his hand on the table, making the silverware jump. "Explain how you looked me in the eye every month and lied. Explain how you looked at my mother, and lied to her face while wearing jewelry that cost more than her yearly pension. I was going to give it to her." Dora's voice rose, desperate now. I was managing it for her, making sure it was invested properly." "In your checking account?" I asked quietly. "In your new car? In your designer wardrobe?" She turned to me, and for the first time, I saw something real in her expression. Not remorse. Fear. "You don't understand," she whispered. "You don't know what it's like, the pressure, the expectations." "You stole from my mother," Ethan said, each word falling like a stone. "You stole from her, and you let her struggle, and you smiled while doing it." Dora stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "I'm not going to sit here and be attacked." "Sit down," Ethan commanded, his voice cold in a way I'd never heard before. "We're not done." She sat, tears streaming down her face now, mascara tracking dark lines across her perfect cheeks. I looked at her across the candlelight and felt not triumph, but something deeper and sadder. "I gave you so many chances," I said softly. "Every visit. Every phone call. Every moment you could have told the truth. And you chose lies. Every single time." The silence that followed was so heavy it felt sacred, the kind of silence that exists in churches after confession, in courtrooms after verdicts, in homes where families break apart and try to understand how they arrived at this precise moment of ruin. Outside, the last light faded from the sky. Inside, the candles burned. And the truth sat among us, finally visible, finally real, finally impossible to ignore. Dora left before dessert. She stood from the table, her chair scraping against the floor with a sound like a scream, and walked out of my house without another word. No apologies. No explanations. Just the click of expensive heels against my worn linoleum, the slam of the front door, and the roar of her Range Rover engine disappearing into the night. Ethan sat frozen at the table, staring at the documents spread before him like evidence at a crime scene. The candles had burned down to stubs. The chicken had gone cold. The apple pie sat untouched on the counter. I didn't move. Didn't speak. Just waited. Finally, he looked up at me, his eyes red and hollow. "Mom, his voice cracked. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything tonight," I replied gently. "Go home. Process this. We'll talk when you're ready." He gathered the documents carefully, as if they were fragile, and stood. At the door, he turned back. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I'm so sorry." "I know." After he left, I sat alone at the table for a long time, watching the candle flames gutter and die. The house felt emptier than it had in months, not the comfortable emptiness of solitude, but the hollow kind that follows explosions. I cleared the dishes. Wrapped the uneaten food. Blew out the last candle. And then I went to bed and slept more soundly than I had in 7 months. The fallout came swiftly. By Monday morning, Ethan had frozen all of Dora's access to his accounts. By Tuesday, his lawyers had filed for legal separation. By Wednesday, the story had leaked, carefully sanitized, stripped of its ugliest details, to the business press. Tech billionaire Ethan Lawton separates from wife amid family financial dispute. The articles were vague, professional, designed to protect privacy while acknowledging reality. But the whispers spread faster than facts ever could. Social media buzzed with speculation. Financial blogs picked up the thread. Within days, Dora's carefully curated Instagram, filled with charity galas and luxury vacations, went dark. I watched it all from my small house in Santa Fe, insulated from the storm but aware of its distant thunder. Ethan didn't call. Didn't visit. For 6 days, I heard nothing. I told myself he needed space. That grief and betrayal required solitude to process. That he would come when he was ready. But late at night, staring at the ceiling, I wondered if I'd lost him anyway, not to Dora's lies, but to the truth I'd forced him to see. He appeared on my doorstep on the 7th day. It was early morning, just after sunrise, and I was in my bathrobe watering the juniper seedling when his Tesla pulled up. He stepped out looking like he'd aged a decade, unshaven, hair uncombed, wearing wrinkled clothes I suspected he'd slept in. "Mom," he said, his voice raw. I set down the watering can and opened my arms. He collapsed into them like the child he'd once been, his tall frame folding down, his face pressed against my shoulder. And he sobbed, deep, wrenching sounds that came from a place I'd heard only once before, the day we'd buried his father. I held him, one hand stroking his hair the way I used to when he was small and afraid of thunderstorms. We stood like that in my front yard, the morning sun warming our backs, until the crying subsided into shaking breaths. "Come inside," I whispered. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where the truth had exploded 6 days earlier. I made coffee. He wrapped his hands around the mug like it was the only solid thing in a tilting world. "I've lost everything," he said finally, his voice hollow. "My marriage. My reputation. He stopped, swallowed hard. "My faith in my own judgment." "You haven't lost everything," I said quietly. "You still have yourself. You still have the truth. You still have me." He looked up, his eyes bloodshot and desperate. "How can you even look at me? I chose her. Over and over. Every time you could have used my help, every time you were struggling, his voice broke again. "I was believing her lies while you were selling Dad's tools." The pain in his voice was so acute it felt physical, like watching someone press on a fresh wound. "Ethan, listen to me." I reached across the table and took his hand. "You didn't commit the crime. You were deceived. There's a difference." "Is there?" He pulled his hand back, rubbing his face. "I should have seen it. All the signs were there. The way she talked about you. The way she... God, Mom, the way she always had excuses for why you couldn't come visit us, why we couldn't spend holidays together. She was isolating you, and I let it happen because it was easier." "You loved her," I said simply. "Love makes us blind sometimes. That's not a character flaw. It's human. It's unforgivable." "No." My voice was firm now, carrying the weight of 7 decades and every hard lesson I'd learned. What Dora did was unforgivable. What you did was trust the person you married. Those aren't the same thing. He was quiet for a long moment, staring into his coffee. "She's gone," he finally said. "Moved out completely. My lawyers say she's hired a team to fight the separation, to claim she was managing the money legitimately, that it was all some misunderstanding." He laughed bitterly. "Even now. Even caught red-handed with forged documents. She's still lying." "Some people can't stop," I said. "Lying becomes the only language they know." "How do you not hate her?" The question surprised me. I considered it carefully, honestly. "I don't hate her," I said slowly. "I pity her. She had everything, a brilliant husband, wealth, opportunity, and she chose to steal from an old woman to buy things she didn't need. That's not power. That's emptiness. That's someone so hollow inside that no amount of luxury can fill the void." Ethan's eyes filled with tears again. "You're more gracious than I am. I've had more practice with disappointment." We sat in silence for a while, the morning light streaming through the kitchen window, illuminating the dust motes that danced in the air. "I keep thinking about something," Ethan said quietly. "Do you remember, I must have been 7 or 8, that kid at school, Tommy Richards, was bullying a smaller kid. I tried to step in and Tommy pushed me down. I came home crying, and you know what I said to you?" I smiled faintly, the memory surfacing. "You said, 'Mom, I'll always protect you. When I grow up, I'll make sure nothing bad ever happens to you.'" He nodded, a tear sliding down his cheek. I promised I'd protect you. And instead, I brought the danger right to your door. I married it. I funded it. I defended it. Ethan. You did the protecting this time, he whispered, his voice breaking on the last word. You protected yourself. You protected me from living with a thief and never knowing it. You did what I should have done. I stood and walked around the table, kneeling beside his chair despite my protesting knees. I took his face in my hands, forcing him to meet my eyes. Listen to me. Justice isn't revenge, sweetheart. It's not about punishment or vindication. It's what keeps us from turning into them, from becoming people who smile while others suffer, who choose comfort over truth. What I did wasn't about hurting you. It was about refusing to disappear. Do you understand? He nodded, tears streaming freely now. And I forgive you, I continued. Not for her crimes, those aren't yours to carry. But for believing her. For not seeing. For being human. I forgive you completely. He wrapped his arms around me, holding on like I was the only anchor in a storm-tossed sea. I love you, Mom, he sobbed. I'm so sorry. I love you so much. I know, baby. I know. And I love you too. I always have. I always will. We stayed like that until the coffee went cold and the sun climbed higher in the sky. Eventually, Ethan pulled back, wiping his face with his sleeve like a child. He looked around the kitchen, at the cracked linoleum, the old appliances, the worn but clean surfaces, and something shifted in his expression. This has to change, he said quietly. Not just the money. Everything. I've been so focused on building empires that I forgot what actually matters. I forgot you. You didn't forget, I said, standing with his help. You just got lost for a while. People do. The important thing is finding your way back. He stood, taller now, steadier. I'm going to fix this. All of it. The money, yes, but more than that. I'm going to be here, Mom. Really here. Not just visits when it's convenient. Not just phone calls when I remember. Here. I touched his cheek. That's all I've ever wanted. He pulled me into another hug, gentler this time, and whispered against my hair. Thank you for not giving up on me. Thank you for being stronger than I was. That's what mothers do, I said simply. We hold the light when our children can't see the way. And in that moment, standing in my small kitchen with my broken, humbled son in my arms, I realized something profound. Sometimes the greatest act of love isn't protection. It's truth. Even when it costs everything. Especially then. October arrived with the kind of clarity that only comes after storms, cool mornings, crystalline skies, and the aspens turning gold across the mountains like promises of transformation. 3 months had passed since the dinner. 3 months of lawyers and paperwork, of frozen accounts and legal settlements, of Ethan slowly rebuilding a life he'd thought was solid but had been built on sand. And 3 months of something else, something quieter, my son coming home. Not for obligatory visits or guilty check-ins, but truly coming home. He appeared most Sunday mornings now, often with coffee and pastries from the bakery I loved, and we'd sit at the kitchen table talking about things that mattered, memory and loss, failure and forgiveness, the small dignities that make life worth living. I've been thinking, he said one Sunday in mid-October, cradling his coffee mug. About what happened. About how many other people this might be happening to. I looked up from my crossword puzzle. What do you mean? Elder financial abuse. He set down his mug, his expression serious. I've been reading about it. It's everywhere, Mom. Family members, caregivers, people in positions of trust, stealing from elderly people who can't defend themselves or are too ashamed to speak up. It's an epidemic. I'm aware, I said quietly. I want to do something about it. He leaned forward, intensity returning to his eyes, the kind I remembered from his childhood when he'd gotten excited about solving problems. I want to start a foundation. Legal aid for seniors. Financial literacy programs. Support services. A hotline. Everything victims would need to fight back. I studied him carefully. That's ambitious. I have the resources. And I have. He paused, swallowing hard. I have a very personal understanding of how this destroys families. How it makes people feel powerless and ashamed. What would you call it? He smiled faintly. I was thinking. The Silver Trust. The name settled in the air between us, simple and dignified. And I want you to run it, he added. I blinked. Ethan, I'm 69 years old. I'm a retired schoolteacher, not a... You're a survivor, he interrupted gently. You're someone who knows exactly what it feels like to be stolen from, gaslit, and dismissed. You're organized, compassionate, and stubborn enough to actually help people instead of just talking about it. He reached across the table and took my hand. There's no one better for this, Mom. No one. I looked down at our joined hands, his smooth and young, mine spotted and worn, and felt something shift inside my chest. Not hesitation. Not fear. Purpose. I'd need help, I said finally. You'll have an entire staff. Lawyers. Social workers. Financial advisors. Whatever you need. And control over how it operates. I won't be a figurehead. I wouldn't dream of it. I squeezed his hand and smiled. Then let's build something good from all this ugliness. The Silver Trust opened its doors in January, in a modest office space near the plaza, accessible, warm, and deliberately unintimidating. No corporate coldness. No marble lobbies. Just comfortable chairs, hot coffee, and people who listened. I came in 3 days a week at first, learning the systems, meeting the staff Ethan had carefully hired, a lawyer named Patricia who specialized in elder law, a social worker named James who'd spent 20 years in protective services, an accountant named Ruth who could trace money through the most convoluted schemes. And the clients came. Slowly at first, then steadily. An 82-year-old man whose daughter had forged his signature on a reverse mortgage. A 74-year-old woman whose son-in-law had convinced her to invest her life savings in a business that didn't exist. A widower whose caregiver had been writing checks to herself for 3 years. Each story was different. Each story was the same. I sat with them in the quiet consultation room, pouring coffee, offering tissues, listening to shame and anger and grief pour out in fractured sentences. I raised him, one woman whispered, tears streaming down her face. I sacrificed everything for my son, and he stole from me like I was nothing. I held her hand and said the words someone should have said to me months earlier, you're not nothing. You're not crazy. You're not confused. You were betrayed. And that's not your fault. The relief in their eyes was profound, the relief of being believed. Ethan came by the office most weeks, usually staying in the background, observing. But sometimes he'd sit in on consultations, and I'd watch him listen to stories that echoed his own shame and learning. One afternoon, a 90-year-old man named Arthur told us how his granddaughter had taken his credit cards and run up $60,000 in debt before disappearing. The worst part, Arthur said, his voice trembling, is that I still love her. Even knowing what she did. Does that make me a fool? Ethan looked at him with understanding I'd never seen before, the kind that only comes from walking through fire. No, sir, Ethan said quietly. It makes you human. Love doesn't stop just because someone betrays it. That's not weakness. That's proof you're still capable of the thing they took advantage of. Arthur nodded slowly, tears in his rheumy eyes. Thank you, son. Thank you for understanding. After Arthur left, Ethan sat in the empty consultation room for a long time, staring at nothing. I see her in every story, he finally said. I see Dora. And I see myself, the person who didn't want to believe it was happening. I sat beside him. Does that make it easier or harder? Both, he admitted. But it makes me want to help more. To make sure other families don't wait as long as we did to face the truth. By spring, the Silver Trust had helped 43 people recover over $2 million in stolen assets. We'd filed criminal charges against 12 family members and 5 caregivers. We'd connected countless others with legal resources, counseling, and community support. The foundation grew beyond anything I'd imagined: a hotline, educational workshops, a network of volunteer lawyers, partnerships with law enforcement. But the moment that stayed with me came on a rainy March afternoon when an elderly woman named Rosemary visited for the first time. She was 81, her hands shaking as she clutched her purse. Her nephew had stolen her pension over 18 months, leaving her facing eviction. I sat with her, listened to her story, connected her with Patricia for legal help and James for emergency housing assistance. As she was leaving, she turned back at the door. "Mrs. Lawton," she said, "why are you doing this? Why do you care about people like me?" I thought about that question, about the real answer beneath the simple one. "Because someone did this to me too," I said quietly. "And I survived. And I learned that the only way to heal from betrayal is to make sure it means something. To turn pain into purpose." Rosemary's eyes filled with tears. She crossed the room and hugged me, frail arms that nonetheless held strength. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for making me feel like I matter." After she left, I sat alone in my office, rain drumming against the windows, and pulled out my blue notebook, the one that had started this entire journey. I turned to a blank page and wrote. The truth didn't destroy me, it rebuilt me. Dora's fate came in pieces, fragments of news that filtered through legal channels and media whispers. The divorce was finalized in February. Ethan's lawyers had negotiated a settlement that required full restitution of the stolen funds, $160,000 total, once all transfers were accounted for, along with legal fees and penalties. Her access to Ethan's fortune, to the lifestyle she'd built on lies, evaporated overnight. The criminal charges were more complicated. Fraud. Forgery. Identity theft. Her lawyers fought, but the evidence was overwhelming: Martin's documents, my recordings, bank records that told stories she couldn't explain away. In the end, she pleaded guilty to avoid trial. Probation. Community service. Restitution payments. Her name attached forever to the crime. The last I heard, she'd moved to Phoenix, working in real estate under her maiden name, trying to rebuild an identity that wasn't synonymous with betrayal. I didn't celebrate her downfall. Didn't take satisfaction in her consequences. I simply let her fade into the past where she belonged, a cautionary tale, a lesson learned, a chapter closed. One evening in late April, Ethan and I stood on my back porch watching the sunset paint the desert hills in shades of amber and rose. The juniper seedling had grown taller, its branches spreading with stubborn life. "Do you regret it?" Ethan asked quietly. "Exposing her? Blowing up my marriage? All of it?" I considered the question honestly. "No," I said finally. "I regret that it was necessary. But I don't regret the truth." He nodded, silent for a moment. "Then, the foundation is changing lives, Mom. Real lives. That man last week, Gerald, he said you saved him from losing his house." "We saved him," I corrected. "This isn't mine alone. But it started with you. Your courage. Your refusal to disappear." I looked at my son, grayer now, humbler, more present than he'd been in years, and felt something like peace. "Good things can grow from bad soil," I said softly. "We just have to be willing to plant them." We stood together as darkness fell, the desert cooling around us, the first stars appearing overhead. And in that moment, I knew, the theft had cost me money, pride, comfort. But the truth had given me back something far more valuable. My dignity. My purpose. My son. And that was worth every stolen dollar. Mother's Day arrived again, exactly 1 year after the question that had changed everything. I woke early, as I always did, and made coffee in the kitchen where so much had been lost and found. The morning light spilled through the window, illuminating the juniper outside, now nearly 3 feet tall, its branches strong and green, rooted deep in soil that had seemed too hard to nurture life. But life finds a way. It always does. I was arranging fresh herbs from my garden when I heard the familiar sound of tires on gravel. Not the electric hum of a Tesla this time, but the older, rougher sound of the used Subaru Ethan had bought after selling most of his luxury vehicles. Simpler is better, he'd said when I'd asked about the change. I spent too many years confusing expensive with meaningful. He stepped out carrying only 2 things, a bouquet of white lilies, the same flowers he'd brought last year, and a thermos of coffee from the bakery we both loved. No designer suits. No expensive gifts. No gestures meant to compensate for absence. Just my son, in jeans and a flannel shirt, smiling the way he used to when he was young and the world was small enough to understand. "Happy Mother's Day, Mom," he said, pulling me into a hug that lasted longer than necessary and felt exactly right. "Happy Mother's Day to you too," I replied, kissing his cheek. He pulled back, confused. "To me? You're a mother's son," I said simply. "That makes today yours as much as mine." We sat on the back porch, in the old wooden chairs Robert had built 30 years ago, their paint faded but their joints still solid. The morning was perfect, cool enough to be comfortable, warm enough to promise heat later, the sky so blue it hurt to look it directly. Ethan poured coffee into the mugs I'd brought out, and we sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching hummingbirds dart between the flowers I'd planted along the fence. "It's been a year," he finally said, not needing to specify what he meant. "It has. Do you think about it? About that dinner?" I considered the question, watching steam rise from my coffee. "Every day. But not the way you might think." "What do you mean?" "I don't think about it with anger anymore. Or even sadness. I think about it as the moment everything clarified. Like those eye exams where they flip through lenses until suddenly everything comes into focus. That dinner was when the right lens clicked into place." Ethan nodded slowly, turning his mug in his hands. "I think about what you said that night. About justice not being revenge. I'm still trying to understand what that means." "It means," I said carefully, "that we don't seek truth to hurt people. We seek it to free ourselves from living in lies." Dora's consequences weren't my revenge. They were simply, what happens when fiction meets reality. "Do you forgive her?" The question hung in the air like morning mist. "I've let her go," I said finally. "That's not quite the same as forgiveness, but it's close enough. She can't hurt me anymore because I don't give her space in my thoughts. She's just someone who made terrible choices and has to live with them now." "That's more grace than I have," Ethan admitted. "I still get angry when I think about how he stopped, jaw tight. That's because she didn't just steal from me, sweetheart. She stole your trust. Your faith in your own judgment. That's a deeper wound, and it takes longer to heal." He was quiet for a moment, then asked, "Do you forgive me?" I turned to look at him, really look at him. His hair was graying at the temples now. Lines had formed around his eyes. He looked older, yes, but also somehow younger. More present. More real. "I forgave you the night you collapsed in my arms," I said softly. "Maybe even before that. You didn't betray me, Ethan. You were deceived. There's a difference. I should have seen it. Maybe. But love makes us blind in ways that have nothing to do with stupidity. You loved her. You wanted to believe the best of her. That's not a character flaw. That's being human." He reached over and took my hand, his grip tight and desperate. "I'm not that blind anymore. I see things clearly now. I see what matters. Who matters." "Good," I said, squeezing back. "Hold on to that clarity. It's more valuable than any wealth you'll ever accumulate." We talked for hours, the way we used to when he was young and curious and the world was full of questions that needed answering. He told me about the Foundation's latest success, a 78-year-old woman who'd recovered nearly $100,000 stolen by her financial advisor. About the new partnerships with law enforcement agencies in 3 states. About the training program they were developing for bank tellers to recognize signs of elder financial abuse. "We're making a difference," he said, his voice filled with quiet pride. "Real, measurable difference. Last week, a woman called the hotline and said we saved her life. Literally. She was planning to," his voice caught. "She said knowing someone believed her, that someone cared, gave her a reason to keep going. That's what truth does," I said. "It gives people permission to stop pretending everything's fine. It lets them say, 'I'm hurt,' without shame." "You taught me that," Ethan said. "By refusing to stay silent. By documenting everything. By insisting on reality even when fiction was more comfortable." I smiled. "I had a good teacher once. My husband. Your father. He used to say, 'Helen, the truth is like water. You can dam it up for a while, but eventually it finds its way through.'" "I miss him," Ethan said quietly. "So do I. Every day. But I feel him in moments like this. In the foundation. In you, when you choose what's right over what's easy." As the sun climbed higher and the morning turned toward afternoon, I went inside and returned with something I'd been saving for this moment. Robert's blue notebook. The one where I'd documented everything. Where I'd written, "Truth costs patience," and "I need to know the truth before it's too late." Where I'd recorded Dora's visits, her lies, her expensive clothes bought with stolen money. "I want you to have this," I said, placing it in Ethan's hands. He opened it carefully, reverently, reading through pages of my careful handwriting, my methodical documentation, my journey from confusion to clarity to action. "Mom, this is," he stopped, emotion thick in his voice. "This is evidence of your strength. You should keep it." "I don't need it anymore," I said. "I lived it. I survived it. But you need to remember that truth isn't always loud or dramatic. Sometimes it's just one person, sitting at a kitchen table, writing down what they know to be real. That's how revolutions start. That's how justice begins." He closed the notebook and held it against his chest. "I'll keep it safe. I'll remember." "Good. And when you're tempted to look away from something difficult, when it's easier to believe comfortable lies than uncomfortable truths, open that notebook and remember, your mother was once that person choosing comfort. And it almost cost me everything." We stood then, moving to the porch railing, looking out over the small yard that had witnessed so much, grief and joy, betrayal and redemption, endings and beginnings. "I brought you flowers last year," Ethan said quietly, and asked a question that destroyed my marriage but saved both our lives. "Yes. This year, I brought flowers again. But this time, I'm not asking questions. I'm just here. Is that enough?" I turned to him, this brilliant man who'd built empires and lost everything and found himself in the rubble, and I smiled. "It's more than enough. It's everything." He pulled me into an embrace, and we stood there as the sunlight filled the porch, warm and golden and forgiving. In that moment, I thought about the journey, from that first shocked silence when he'd asked about the money, through the investigation and confrontation, through tears and legal battles and slow rebuilding. I thought about how money had tested love and found it wanting, but how truth had purified what remained, burning away the false until only the real survived. I thought about the foundation, about the lives changed, about the elderly men and women who walked into our office carrying shame and walked out carrying dignity. I thought about Dora, wherever she was, living with choices that would follow her forever. And I thought about forgiveness, not as forgetting, but as choosing to let the past inform the present without poisoning it. "Mom," Ethan whispered against my hair, "thank you for not giving up. On the truth. On me. On us. That's what love does," I said softly. "Real love, the kind that can't be bought or stolen or destroyed by lies. It survives. It persists. It grows back stronger, like that juniper we planted. We stayed like that, holding each other in the morning light, and I knew with absolute certainty. When the hands that once betrayed you return empty, don't close your door. Let them see that love, real love, can't be stolen. It survives every theft. It outlasts every lie. It remains when everything else has burned away. And in that remaining, in that stubborn persistence of connection despite every reason to sever it, we find not just forgiveness but something deeper. Redemption. Renewal. The proof that we are more than what was done to us. We are what we choose to do next. The sun climbed higher. The hummingbird sang. The juniper grew. And on a porch in Santa Fe, a mother and son stood together, broken once, but whole again. Not because the betrayal never happened, but because the truth, finally told, had set them both free.